You are tucking them in tonight, your hand brushing their forehead, a final kiss on a cheek impossibly soft, pulling the blanket up to that tiny chin. The click of the door, the sliver of hallway light, and you stand there for a moment, listening to the quiet. It is the most natural thing in the world, this ritual. The safety of the blanket, the fortress of the bedroom, the silent vigil you keep from the next room. You believe, deep in your bones, that this is how you keep them safe. But for 99.9% of human history, that scene would have been a death sentence. Tonight, you are not thinking about the temperature, or the monsters, or the silence. You are thinking about the world you have built for them. A world of soft edges and locked doors and carefully monitored everything. It feels like the only way. The right way? But it is a story written in the last few blinks of an eye. In the long, dark night of human existence. The real story of how your direct ancestors kept kids alive is written on a different landscape entirely. It is a story not of separation, but of fusion. Not of silence, but of constant sound. Not of a safety you provide from the next room, but of a safety they wore, pressed against their skin, every second of every terrifying night. Your instinct to keep them close, to let them sleep in your bed, to scoop them up at the first cry, that is not a modern indulgence. That is a 2 million-year-old alarm system, screaming in your blood. And for almost the entire history of your species, ignoring it meant a tiny body would be cold by morning. Think of that for a second. Not a century ago, not 1,000 years ago, 200,000 years of Homo sapiens, and 2 million years of earlier hominids before that. Across that unimaginable stretch of time, childhood was not a phase of life. It was the single most perilous tightrope walk in the natural world. The margin for error was zero. The predators were real, and they hunted in the dark. The cold was a physical presence that could drain life in hours. Starvation was a constant, lurking shadow. And in the middle of it all was a creature uniquely, catastrophically vulnerable, a human infant. They couldn't run. They couldn't hold on. They couldn't regulate their own temperature. For years, they were effectively helpless. In the brutal calculus of evolution, this should have been a fatal design flaw. A species that invests this much time and energy into a single offspring, that remains a fragile, needy liability for a decade. It's evolutionary madness. And yet, here you are. Your lineage survived. Not just survived, it conquered the planet. How? The answer is not a single tool or a clever trick. It is a complete rewriting of the human social contract. It is a biological and behavioral masterpiece so complex, we are only now beginning to understand its pieces. The first piece starts not with the child, but with you, or rather, with a version of you that is so fundamentally different, you would barely recognize her. She is not an individual. She is a node in a network. Her body is not entirely her own, and her most critical survival tool is something you still feel in your chest, right now, when you hear that faint cough from the other room, that lurch, that primal, electric fear. That is your starting point. Because in the ancient world, that feeling wasn't a symptom of anxiety. It was the central guidance system for our entire species. And to see how it worked, we have to leave the safety of the bedroom and step into a night so dark, so vast, and so full of teeth, it will rewrite everything you think you know about keeping a child alive. Let's begin with the most obvious, most lethal threat, the cold. You feel it now, adjusting the thermostat, ensuring the blanket is snug. But in the ancient world, thermostats were campfires that could die, and blankets were animal hides that could be inadequate. For a newborn, hypothermia is not a risk. It is a certainty, waiting mere hours away. Thrown into an ice age world, their one defense? Your skin. More specifically, the heat that radiates from your torso. This is not a metaphor. This is a physical, thermodynamic necessity. The practice is called kangaroo care in modern neonatal units, where premature infants are placed skin to skin on a parent's chest. It stabilizes their heart rate, their breathing, their temperature. It is the single most effective medical intervention for a fragile newborn, bar none. And it is not a modern discovery. It is a 2 million-year-old prescription. The fossil record tells a brutal story here. Before the consistent use of fire, evidence of very young children at ancient sites is vanishingly rare. It is as if they simply disappeared. The leading theory is as grim as it is logical. Without constant, direct body heat, infants in temperate or cold climates did not survive their first nights. They couldn't. Their tiny bodies lost heat faster than they could produce it. So the first rule of ancient childcare was not a rule of mind, but of body. You shall not be separated, not for a minute. The child was worn, strapped to the chest or back, sleeping on the mother or another caregiver for months. This was not bonding. This was life support. But the cold was only the first enemy. The second was hunger. A human mother's milk is remarkably dilute compared to other mammals. It is low in fat, low in protein. This seems, again, like a disastrous design flaw. A gazelle fawn is on its feet and eating grass in days. A human infant needs this subpar milk for years. Why? Because human milk is not designed to be the sole source of nutrition. It is designed to be a constant, low-dose infusion, delivered on demand, dozens of times a day and night. This served two ancient, brutal purposes. First, it kept the infant hydrated and nourished in a patchy, unpredictable environment where clean water was scarce, and other food was impossible for them to digest. Second, and far more critically, it kept the mother's ovulation suppressed. This is the hidden, ruthless genius of the system. Frequent nursing was a natural birth control. In an environment where a mother carrying a new infant while still nursing a toddler would be a death sentence for both, spreading her resources too thin, slowing the group down. This biological trick enforced spacing. It meant a mother could focus all her energy on one vulnerable child for several years before the next arrived. The child's constant need to feed was not an inconvenience. It was a strategic tool for their own survival. It locked the mother's body into a single, all-consuming task, keeping this one alive. And then, there is the sound. In your quiet house, a baby's cry is a stressor. It jars you from sleep, spikes your blood pressure. You shush it, soothe it, try to make it stop. In the ancient savanna or forest, that cry was a catastrophic liability. It was a beacon, a ringing dinner bell for every hyena, big cat, and predator in a mile radius. A crying infant threatened not only itself, but the entire band. So why, in the name of all that is logical, did evolution design a human infant to be so spectacularly, dangerously loud? Because the cry was never for the predators. It was a biological siren, hardwired directly into the caregiver's central nervous system. Studies show that a baby's cry triggers a flood of stress hormones in adults, specifically cortisol, that creates a state of hypervigilance, a physical urgency to respond. It is deliberately unbearable. It is meant to override your exhaustion, your hunger, your fear. In the modern world, we pathologize this as anxiety. In the ancient world, this was the security system. A baby left to cry it out in the Pleistocene would, very simply, have been found and eaten. The species could not afford parents who slept through the alarm, so the alarm was made biologically impossible to ignore. Which brings us to the most profound, most counterintuitive piece of the puzzle. We've talked about the child's needs: heat, food, silence. But who provided it? The answer seems obvious: the mother. And for the first 6 months or so, she was the primary source. But here is where human strategy diverges from every other primate on the planet. Our babies were too needy, our mothers too depleted. Carrying a growing child, gathering food, processing it, defending against threats. No single person could do it all and survive. The mother would collapse, and the child would die with her. So evolution engineered a workaround. It took the entire village, and it baked their cooperation directly into our biology. And the mechanism for this is something you can still see in your own life, in the most ordinary of moments. It lives in a glance, a shared smile, a spontaneous act of care. It is the reason you might feel a tug in your chest when you see any child in distress, not just your own. And to understand how this invisible network of care actually functioned, how it turned the helpless human infant from a fatal liability into our species' greatest evolutionary advantage, we have to look at the one thing archaeologists never expected to find. The first sign of it came not from bones, but from stones. Archaeologists sifting through the layers of a 2-million-year-old site in Africa found something that didn't make sense. They found the tiny, razor-sharp flakes of stone, the kind used for precise cutting and scraping. But they were concentrated in one area, right alongside the larger, clumsier tools. And the wear patterns on those small flakes told a clear story. They weren't used for processing tough meat or hacking roots. They were used on soft materials, on plants, on skins. The leading theory is that these were not the tools of hunters. They were the tools of caregivers. Someone was sitting there, in that spot, painstakingly preparing soft, palatable food, mashing tubers, scraping marrow from bones into a paste, tenderizing meat into something a toothless infant or a toddler with weak jaws could actually eat. This was weaning food, and the person making it was not necessarily the mother, because the mother's hands were full, literally. She was the life support pod, the source of heat and constant milk. She couldn't also be spending hours processing specialized food. So someone else was doing it. A grandmother, an aunt, an older sibling. This is the first hard evidence of the village in action. It's called alloparenting, care provided by someone other than the biological parent. And in humans, it isn't just a helpful bonus. It is the core architecture of our survival. But how do you get an entire group of stressed, hungry, self-interested adults to invest their precious time and calories in someone else's child? In the animal kingdom, that's a fatal generosity. You don't see chimpanzee ants spending their afternoon mashing figs for their sister's baby. The mother is on her own. So what changed in us? The twist lies in a trade-off so profound, it altered the very fabric of time. Human babies are born catastrophically early. Compared to other primates, a human infant should gestate for about 21 months to reach the same level of development as a newborn chimp, but they can't. The mother's metabolism can't support it, and her narrow pelvis, adapted for walking upright, couldn't possibly deliver it. So evolution hit upon a desperate, brilliant solution. Eject the baby halfway through. Let it finish developing out here in the world. This is the real meaning of that helplessness. It's not a flaw. It's a strategy. By being born so underdone, with a brain that is only 30% of its adult size, the human infant is all potential. Its neural pathways are wide open, unformed. It is a learning machine, designed for one thing: to wire itself to the people around it. This is the biological bargain. We traded self-sufficiency at birth for a superpower: hypersocialization. A newborn chimp clings to its mother's fur, and that's the totality of its world. A human infant is a receptor, tuning into faces, voices, touch. It is building a mental map of its caregivers not as one entity, but as a network. And this is where the village gets wired in. That baby isn't just bonding with a mother. It is creating a web of attachment, of trust, of shared identity. It is learning, in its very neurons, who its people are. And in doing so, it gives those people a biological reason to care. You felt this. It's that involuntary smile that breaks across your face when a baby in a grocery store locks eyes with you and grins. It's the way your voice goes up an octave without you thinking. That isn't just culture. It's a physiological pull. Studies show that interacting with an infant triggers a release of oxytocin, the bonding hormone. In the adult, too. Not just the parent. In anyone. The baby's cuteness, its openness, is an evolutionary trap for care. It compels you to invest. So the system begins to snap into place. The mother provides the constant physical base, the heat, the milk on tap. But around her, the network activates. The grandmother, past her own reproductive years, becomes a bank of wisdom and calories. She knows where the safe routes are. She can take the toddler for an hour. She is the living memory of past famines and solutions. The father or other mates provide protection and high-calorie meat. Older siblings, by carrying or playing with the infant, learn the skills of care themselves and free up the mother's hands. This is the human breakthrough. We didn't just bear helpless young. We invented a distributed system for their survival. The child's need became the social glue that bound the group together with a common, urgent purpose. And the evidence for this is etched in the most intimate place imaginable: the teeth. Paleoanthropologists can now analyze the teeth of our ancient ancestors with laser precision. And what they've found in the teeth of children who died 2 million years ago tells a story of profound crisis and profound care. By looking at stress lines in the enamel, like tree rings marking a hard winter, they can see periods of sickness or famine that the child survived. And the pattern is clear. These children suffered severe physiological shocks, but they didn't die during them. They lived through them for weeks or months, long enough for the growth lines to record the recovery. Think about what that means. A toddler, in the midst of a famine or a terrible infection, cannot fend for itself. It cannot go find its own food or medicine. The fact that it survived a prolonged crisis means one thing only: someone was giving it their own food. Someone was carrying it when it couldn't walk. Someone was bringing it water, nursing it through fever. The teeth are a fossil record of sacrifice. They prove that the village was real and that it worked. A child's survival was the group's project. But this system had one more terrifying layer. Because all of this, the constant carrying, the shared food, the sleepless vigilance, came at an enormous cost. It burned metabolic fuel at a staggering rate. The adult caregivers, especially the mother, were running a physiological marathon every single day. And this is where we find the final, masterful adaptation. It's not in the baby or even in the social group. It's in the human brain itself. and in a function you are using right now to read these words. Our brains are energy monsters. They consume 20% of our calories while being only 2% of our body mass. For a mother whose body is already being drained by lactation and the physical strain of care, this should be impossible. She should collapse. But she doesn't, because the human brain developed a way to offload its work. It developed the ability to think abstractly, to plan ahead, to imagine the future. This allowed for something radical: efficiency through foresight. A mother, or any caregiver, wasn't just reacting to the crying infant in the moment. She was using her complex brain to solve problems before they happened. She remembered that the berries by the river made the toddler sick last season, so she goes to the farther grove today. She observed that the child slept better when rocked in a certain rhythm, so she does it instinctively. She understood that leaving the infant with her trusted sister for an hour meant she could gather more nuts, which meant more weaning food tomorrow. This cognitive leap turned care from a brute force reaction into a strategic operation. It allowed the village to coordinate, to specialize, to turn the relentless burden of the child into a managed, shared investment. The child's long, slow childhood was no longer just a vulnerability to be endured. It became the incubation period for the very thing that would let our species dominate the planet: a hyper-cooperative, forward-thinking social mind. The child was learning from the network, and the network was evolving because of the child. And this brings us to the quietest, most devastating piece of proof. It's not in the tools, or the teeth, or the genetics. It's in the dirt, in the ash of ancient hearths. For decades, archaeologists assumed the central fire was for cooking, for warmth, for keeping predators at bay, and it was. But at certain sites, going back hundreds of thousands of years, they find something peculiar. They find the bones of very young children, not scattered, but carefully placed in the sleeping areas right next to the hearth. And they find something else mixed in the ash around them: tiny, polished stones. Smooth pebbles, shells with holes in them. They weren't tools. They were toys. The firelight wasn't just a barrier against the dark. It was the first classroom. It was where the infant, safe in a sling on its mother's chest, watched the dancing shadows. It was where the toddler, propped against a grandmother's legs, was handed a smooth stone to hold. It was where the stories were told, where the faces were learned, where the web of language and culture was woven directly into a developing mind. The hearth was the nucleus of the village, and the child was at its absolute center. This changes everything. It means the safety of the ancient child wasn't just a physical bubble of protection. It was a sensory and social cocoon. Their world was not one of deprivation and terror, but of constant, rhythmic stimulation. The sound of the heartbeat they were pressed against, the murmur of voices, the flicker of fire, the secure grip of hands that never put them down. Their crib was a living, breathing, talking, walking environment. Their monitor was a chorus of heartbeats, and if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of that ancient system failing. It has a modern name: failure to thrive. In orphanages and hospitals in the last century, before this was understood, infants given perfect nutrition, perfect hygiene, in perfectly quiet rooms would simply fade away. They would stop growing, their immune systems would collapse, and some would die. The one thing missing was the constant touch, the responsive care, the human network. They had all the physical ingredients for life, but they were starved of the ancient protocol. The protocol that says a child is not a standalone project. It is a node in a network. Its survival is a conversation between its needs, and the community's response a conversation written in touch, in milk, in sound, and in the silent, sacred economy of shared calories. So when you stand in that hallway tonight, listening to the quiet, you are not failing at the ancient way. You are living in its staggering, miraculous victory. The locked door and the baby monitor are just the newest tools in a 2 million-year-old project. That quiet is a luxury your ancestors could never have dreamed of. It is the sound of the predators being kept not by fire, but by walls. It is the sound of the cold being held not at bay by your skin, but by central heating. But the core program is still running. That lurch you feel is the same. The urge to go in, to check, to touch a forehead. That is the ghost of the ancient network, pinging your system. A signal from a time when the only thing standing between a child and the bottomless dark was the warmth of your body, the alertness of your mind, and the unbreakable web of care you were both embedded in. And that web had one last, stunning trick. It didn't just keep children alive. It transformed them. Because all that constant contact, all that shared attention, and processed food bought our species one final, impossible gift: Time. That time is written in the margins of a life. In the years between weaning and adulthood, that no other animal gets. Years not for survival, but for exploration, for play, for asking what if. The village, by absorbing the brutal work of keeping a body alive, freed the child's mind to wander, to experiment with a tool, to paint with ochre on a cave wall, to imagine a spirit in the storm. That extended, protected childhood is the furnace of human culture. Every story, every song, every innovation began as a spark in a well-fed, safe enough mind of a child who did not have to spend every calorie just fighting to see tomorrow. So when you see your child lost in a pretend world, building a fort of cushions, or arguing with elaborate, imaginary rules, you are not seeing idle time. You are seeing the ancient dividend being paid. You are watching the 2 million-year-old investment mature. The village's calories are now their curiosity. The firelit safety is now their creativity. The network of care has become the network of their imagination. This is the final, beautiful reversal. The very thing that made us so vulnerable, our desperate, prolonged need for each other, became the source of our ultimate strength. We are not the smartest animal because we cared for our young. We are the only animal who could afford to care for our young this much, because we were smart enough to build a system to do it. And that system, in turn, made us smarter. Which brings you back to the hallway, to the quiet. The monitor glows softly. The thermostat hums. You are the village now, and the work is the same. The relentless, sacred, metabolically expensive work of turning calories into safety, into growth, into a future. You feel it in your exhaustion at the end of the day. That is the ancient tax on keeping a human child alive. You feel it in your worry. That is the old alarm system, still scanning the dark. But you also see it in their laughter, in their questions, in the terrifying, wonderful breadth of their world. So tonight, when you finally step away from that door, know this. You are not leaving them alone in the dark. You are standing guard in a fortress built of 2 million years of ingenuity and love. The silence around you is not an absence. It is an achievement, the greatest achievement our kind has ever known. And the next time you feel that lurch in the quiet dark, don't call it anxiety. Call it an heirloom.